I'm John, and tonight I want answers about the movie Jobs. There's no stopping us now, because we're live.
John wants answers. Give John answers. John wants answers.
I forgot my overalls.
Give John answers now.
Welcome to the show. We've got a very special show tonight. We're going to talk about the movie Jobs with people who were in the movie Jobs. Not the actors, but the people that actors were portraying. First up, we have Steve Wozniak. He was the co-founder of Apple Computer. He's the author of I Was, Full of Truths. And he's also author of The Official Computer Freaks Joke Book. This book is terrible.
At least you're honest.
Also on the show, we have Daniel Kottke.
Yes.
He's one of the very first Apple employees. He was a college roommate of Steve Jobs.
And I'm here playing Lucas Haas, who represents me virtually.
Okay. So he knows all the juicy stuff. And we have Andy Hertzfeld on the show. He's the author of Revolution in the Valley. And he was the original Mac software chief architect.
Wizard.
Almost. Yeah, so I was software wizard was my title.
Yeah.
Chief Wizard.
So I want to thank you all for being on the show. We're going to go through the movie scene by scene. So sit back and get ready. We're going to see. And I'm your host, John A. Vink. I was an Apple engineer from 1996 to 2012. And in the room we have many, many Apple luminaries. And I might call out to them as needed. Okay, movie starts out at the iPod intro at Town Hall. This was, in the movie, they combined two events. So really what happened was they had a press event where they showed off the iPod, and then a few days later they had an employee meeting where Steve talked to the employees and said, hey, look, we made an iPod. In the movie, they had it like Steve was showing the employees first before anyone else. And that would never happen at Apple. So this is really a combination of two events. And I was there. And that's really where my involvement in this movie ends. This is why I brought on three guests, so they could talk about the rest of the movie. So the movie starts at the end, and then it jumps to the beginning. Reed College, 1974.
Yeah.
Well, in some ways, though, the start of the movie was sometimes like the best part.
So Daniel, you were.
By the way, let me say, I drove Steve, and
You drove Steve to college?
and
Right.
his girlfriend, Chris,
Ann?
Julie here, I guess.
Well,
drove
no,
them.
Julie
I
was
drove them to the college when he started, and he showed me his. They said you have to go to these classes. Well, that's what happens when you go to college, Steve.
Yeah.
The first couple of years, you go to their classes. And he said he didn't like. They thought you just went and you just dropped in on any classes you felt like. That college was just an experience to be around smart people. So he didn't go to any. The first day and the second day, stayed in this little tent in the room with his girlfriend, and I was all scared. I could have never been so brave to skip classes in college.
Were you'd see, you had already dropped out of Boulder at that time.
No, I
right?
had never dropped out.
No, I mean, you went to Boulder, right?
I went to Boulder, and I
for
went
a year?
to my second year of college, and I met Steve when I was working for another year of college programming to earn money for a third year of college. So I had met him, and then we had had our year of blue boxes at Berkeley, and
Right.
so when he went up there, yeah, I drove him up. I visited him about 6 times.
Did you ever hear how Steve ended up at Reed?
Well, he actually, believe it or not, it might have been the only college he got into or applied to, but he admired the fact that they had one chemistry professor who had won a Nobel Prize. And oh my gosh, the guys at Stanford won Nobel Prizes. This was a premier type of person that you wanted to be around and near.
I can't think of who that
However,
was.
it was a very liberal college, probably appealing to a lot of very liberal-minded, young, counterculture type people too. Because I went up there and I met a lot of them, his roommates and other people, and they all kind of fit that mold.
Yeah.
So the movie starts out with Professor Jack, who I guess knows he dropped out, and he's trying to
No, Jack was the dean.
The dean?
Jack
Oh,
Dudman.
he's a dean.
Yes.
Okay. He said, "Hey, you're a smart kid. You should do something with your life." Pretty much is what he said. And then he went off and found some girl named Julie, who was reading a calligraphy book.
Yeah, that was all just made up.
Yeah,
he
I'll part
kind of
it up.
already, like I said, he already knew her. They'd already had sex and more.
No, that's not Chris Ann. The
No,
Jews
no,
is a
definitely
different
not Chris
character.
Ann.
Oh, okay.
No.
So that was just that's
Oh,
why
it sure fit.
made up.
It sure fit perfectly.
Does that mean
No.
to indicate that he was sleeping around in college?
Well, no, really, the truth is Steve badly wanted a girlfriend in college, didn't we all? And he didn't really find his girlfriend in college.
Where do you meet Chris Ann?
High school.
High school,
She was his
yeah.
high school sweetheart.
So, but did she come to college to be around him as well?
I met her at Reed. She came to visit.
Drove up
Came
just
to
for that first week, and then I drove
Yeah.
her back home.
All right.
And she came one other time. That's when I met her.
Apparently, Julie's the girl you go
She
to.
was
when you want
a
some
year
LSD.
ahead of him in high school.
Really?
Chris Ann.
Oh, okay.
I think so.
So, yeah, Julie was the LSD supplier. And then after that, you guys are in a
Well-
meadow. You and Steve and Chris Ann are in a meadow.
So was
and
Chris
you're
Ann,
listening to classical music that's coming from the stars or something.
Well, it's all just made up. But I would say that scene came off pretty well, I thought.
Yeah.
That scene I actually
made
felt
up
was
scene.
kind of close to the truth for the way people
Yes.
see it.
So
Yeah.
did you ever take LSD with Steve?
Oh, yeah. Bunch of times. Bunch of times.
And Chris Ann, the three of you?
No, never with Chris Ann.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so here's the funny line I have to tell you. This is a funny one. So in the script, I was a script consultant. There was a scene where we're lying in this field, okay, and Steve goes, "Listen, the wind is playing Bach." And my character goes, "It's called the wind, Steve," which I never ever would have said. But it was such a corny thing to say, it made me laugh. And so I had to tell the producers, I had to say, well, I never would have said that, but you can leave it in if you want because it's kind of funny.
Kind of funny.
And I was kind of relieved that they took it out because I would have been teased about that for the rest of my life, I'm sure.
You're going to be teased now because now it's on TV. So then he went off and took calligraphy classes.
I was in the same class.
And you're in that class too?
Yes.
And this so-called Julie was in that class too, apparently.
There was no
There
Julie.
was Julie, right?
Actually, okay, so here, if you want to know, he had a big crush on Kathy Dykman, who lives in Berkeley. Kathy, hi. And so Steve found out that Kathy's father was Arthur Dykman, famous psychologist. And so Steve's modus operandi was to track down Arthur and chat him up to get at his daughter. Okay, right? Sounds like Steve, right?
No, I wouldn't know about them.
Well, he would go to the source, right, of what he wanted. And so, but then the other one that he had the big crush on was Joelle. Joelle, she's a painter in Brooklyn. I tracked her down thanks to Google. And at the time of the script edits, I said, Joelle, do you realize that Steve Jobs had a huge crush on you in college? Would you have any anecdotes about that? Would you like to make a comment? You could be in this movie, right? They would have happily put her in the movie. And she replied, I don't have anything to say, and if I did, I wouldn't say it. Which I thought was funny. Anyway.
So then Steve took electronics classes, but were bored and walked out during them.
Well, there was no electronics.
I don't think
There
they
was
had electronics.
no
at
electronics
Reed.
at
That
Reed.
explains everything.
He'd taken electronics at our high school.
Yes.
But I don't think he got good grades in anything. But
Right.
he understood electronics, enough to look at a schematic and solder things together. Yeah, not like a designer.
Okay, and what was the name of your electronics teacher at Homestead?
But, Mr. McCollum.
McCollum,
John
right?
C. McCollum. Yeah.
Right. Super
Great
guy.
teacher, great class. Better than any of the local college electronics courses, actually.
And Chris Espinoza was in the same class from John. And
Well,
John
a lot of
died a
us,
few
yeah.
years ago, and there was a really nice obituary in the local paper. I don't know if you saw that.
I think I saw that.
Yeah.
But certainly when we were there, our class was kind of back in vacuum tubes. barely touching transistors,
Oh, you're
and
dating
it didn't
yourself
touch
now.
computers. So
Yeah.
it didn't touch computers. So this idea he was watching a TV show and computers are going to be the future. Well, that was the sort of TV show you saw at home on normal TV, Just
Then we see him traveling to India with you. And there's just like a montage of things that happened there.
Yeah. Well, that was, they didn't even ask me about that. They just made that up, but it came out, well, it was vague, and so it was okay.
Then we come back, and he's at Atari.
but just to take a step back, as long as you're going through the chronology here, the really interesting part about the Reed story was that within the first couple weeks of Reed, Steve came to the conclusion that he didn't actually need college credits, and so before he withdrew, he went to Dudman and said, the story, right? He went to Dudman and he goes, I can't really afford to be here, but if I get my money back, can I still take classes? And, what a crazy thing to think, And I knew that when I first met Steve, but I didn't really ask him about it. Like, what the hell are you thinking, Steve? I mean, because it never would have occurred to me.
Did he get his money back?
He did. He got all his money back. He got all his money back, and Dudman,
For your kids out there.
Well, he also
don't
didn't
pay for college.
have the responsibility to have to actually take tests
and get a degree.
and get
Yes.
grades because he wasn't
Yes.
after credit.
Yes, but anyway, so and then the last part of that story was, so then he gets his money back, and now he's like going to be auditing some classes, okay? And then a couple weeks later, he goes back to Dudman again and says, well, I noticed that there are students dropping out and there are these empty dorm rooms. Could I stay in one of these dorm rooms? True, that's the true story. And so, although they just kind of made up what the scene you see in the movie, the truth is Dudman was a rare guy who saw a spark of interest in Steve and encouraged him to stay. And he did, that's a very unusual thing. Just try that at Stanford, right?
Look how few people will, when it doesn't really cost them much, they won't give anyway.
So the movie jumps to him working at Atari, and he's yelling at some guy for being an idiot for making a black and white game.
By the way, he came back from Reed College and saw that I had built my own Pong game. Haven't seen one in a bowling alley. On a small little board with just 28 little $1 chips. And so that gave him the idea to go down to Atari, which was in Los Gatos, California. And he went down and he showed them the board and he wound up with a job.
Wow.
Nolan Bushnell likes to say, well, I was hiring two Steves, but because he wasn't a designer, he wasn't an engineer, he never wrote any software, but he knew electronics a bit, He was telling the other engineers their soldering wasn't good.
Yeah. I remember driving through Los Gatos and there's an Atari building still in Los Gatos. Is that the original Atari building or just
The original...
There were a couple.
No. Arcade games started basically in Los Gatos, California, and that was the only one at the time, and so did the Pet Rock. So I live in a good town.
So Steve alienates all his colleagues, and he calls them idiots, and he smells terribly because he thinks eating fruit means he doesn't need to bathe, etc.
Oh, that's not true. None of that's true.
That's not true?
Really. None of
The
that's
fruitarian
Oh,
diet?
no, it's
You
ask
think-
Nolan Bushnell. Yeah, it's,
Yeah, it's true.
Well, I don't know. When I asked Al Alcorn, I don't know. My statement is, in all the time I spent with Steve, sleeping, next to him and camping out, and I never ever once had the thought that he needed to take a shower.
Nor did I.
Never
Nor did I.
once. Never
But
once.
engineers might have complained about it because he was criticized them in his other ways.
Yeah, I got a story about that. It's later in the chronology, but Scotty took Steve for a walk around the parking lot to tell him to shower because people were complaining. And the reason I know that is Steve took Burl for that same walk around the parking lot because Burl also didn't shower. And so Steve told him, he goes, well, this is what Scotty told me.
Now, I'm probably like you.
That's
We
funny.
wouldn't care. You and I wouldn't
I just
care,
wouldn't
so we
care.
wouldn't notice.
When marketing people walk through our area at my company, they say, oh, it smells like engineering in here. So engineering has a certain smell.
We had a joke for Burl. We were going to get him a birthday present with 12 pairs of underwear marked January, February, March.
You didn't do days of the week? Oh, geez. So Steve is frustrated at Atari, and he wants his own project. And here's a story that's told over and over again. He gets offered $5,000 for fixing a game. Now, I don't know if it's Breakout or Pong, but he takes the offer, and he tries to work on it, and he can't figure it out. And so then he calls you, Steve.
It's not fixing a game. It's
It was a new,
designing
yeah, it
a
was a
game.
new design.
Designing it, okay.
But he
Designing it.
didn't have the design abilities. That was the problem.
Right.
Maybe he thought he could figure it out because he knew how to look at schematics and modify. There's a step between being a technician, being able to work on stuff, and actually being able to create your own. And he hadn't made that jump yet. And that was, and it was Breakout. And And it was a real clever design. They had him working on the night shift all alone. I like the fact Atari was so open. Steve would invite me in.
Yeah.
I'd go in
Me too.
in the middle of the night.
Me too.
No cards. You have to get through secret doors and all this. You go on the factory floor and play the newest games that aren't even out yet in the arcades.
And according to the movie, he invited you in so that you could do his work for him.
Now, and Steve described how he had put a sound chip that they had designed a game out in Grass Valley, the other place maybe. Designed a game, and he put in sound chips for this game called Simon. Touch your hand, beep, beep, beep,
Steve
to
Mayer.
duplicate the tones. And what?
Steve Mayer.
Had designed it?
He was the chip guy at Atari.
Yeah, I know Steve Mayer.
Yeah, I know that. He did the one chip. Well, he did the one chip Pong for the home later on. I know.
Oh.
And he was also without a college degree, as I recall. But Steve Jobs had put the sound chip in to make the sounds, and get them tweaked the right way. That was his claim to fame. But now we were on to Breakout, and yeah, and I don't know if it didn't show the intensity of that. That was an impossible project, and we actually did it.
With no processor, all TTL.
Yeah, no software. There were no Atari games yet that were software. There were no Atari games that were color even, but ours wasn't either. Breakout wasn't either.
Now, the story was he was offered $5,000 to do it, but he told you they were offered $700 and that he would split it with you. Now, do those numbers sound like the right numbers?
That is what happened. That's the truth. It wouldn't have mattered. If he had said, I need the money to buy into this farm in Oregon, I would have said, take it all. I was happy to be on the project.
Right.
We had always split our money 50-50. This was the third such project where we'd split our money, or turned it into money. And
Really? There was the blue boxes?
yeah, well, there was basically the Pong game too.
Oh, right.
Well, that worked into a job. Then there was Breakout. Then there was a Terminal. Then there was an Apple.
Computer
And then there was another
converter,
Apple.
right?
Yeah. So yeah, he was paid $7,000. He told me we were paid $700, and he wrote me a check for $350. But that hurts because we were friends. And do you do that to a friend? But it didn't hurt financially.
Yeah.
I had a job as an engineer at Hewlett Packard. So.
And Atari loved it, and Steve took
No.
all the credit? No, Atari didn't love it?
Oh yeah, some people at Atari loved it, but the engineers, it wasn't their way, and it wasn't designed in-house, and they didn't understand my tricky design.
It's too tricky.
I did the entire design.
So did you do a timing diagram and turn that in? Because you couldn't make sense of it without a timing diagram, right?
Well, you know what? That would have been easy to do. Nobody ever asked me one question. If the engineers wanted to know one thing, all they had to do was ask me. But maybe they didn't know I had done it. We were just doing it late at night. There wasn't necessarily anyone at Atari that knew my role in it.
And
See, I don't know what was said there. So
did you have anyone copying over your schematics? I mean,
what do you mean copying over?
well, no, I mean
the schematics were left. The prototype was left. I don't have a thing in my possession. No, I just.
But I mean, you probably did the schematic.
After 4 days and nights
in a-
without sleep, you know what?
The schematic
You just
was
go
fragments.
Home. You go home.
Right.
Well, my favorite part of the story is you both got mononucleosis, right?
We both got the sleeping sickness, mononucleosis,
Wow.
and I remember there was one Coke can that we had shared, and maybe that was how. I don't know. So I don't know who. Yeah, no, that was a real
And
heavy.
what, Steve
heavy
wasn't into
illness.
carrot juice yet at the time?
But we did it. But we completed it in 4 days, 4 days and nights. Unbelievable. I didn't even think I could do that, and gave it to Atari. That was a big kudo in my life. Yeah, big success.
Wow.
At the start of the show, I forgot to mention that we are live, and you can send us your tweets and your messages, and we're going to read them and get back to you on the show. So you can tweet us at John Wants Answer. There's no S on the end. And you can send us a message from our website. Go to johnwantsanswers.com. And there's a contact link on there, and you can send us a message, and we'll read your messages later in the show, and we'll have our great panel answer your questions for you. Okay, so in the movie we jump to a scene
I want
where...
to say one more thing about Atari.
Oh, okay.
I really, even while I was there, admired Nolan Bushnell for basically giving Steve, some credit, reputation. He didn't have any background, any skills, any education, any degrees or anything, but basically, he was my best tech friend. So giving him a job there, I really admired a company that could do that. Steve met the guys right at the top. Al Alcorn would drive us around in his Porsche, so they did. However, they did miss the chance to buy a third of Apple for $50,000
Yes, he talks about that.
later on.
That's a good deal.
You know what's funny? Steve took me to Atari when I arrived that summer to see if I could get a job there. And so I'm filling out the form, application, and it said experience. I said, what should I say, Steve? And he goes, DVM, digital voltmeter. I didn't even know it. I didn't know what a digital voltmeter was, but that's what I put down for experience. Well, no, they didn't hire me, but Steve hired me.
Oh, that's nice. So we see Steve Jobs coming to your house. Steve comes to Steve's house, and you were
No.
there recording Polish jokes.
Oh, right.
For your dial joke service.
Right.
This was an earlier point in time.
Right.
This is earlier.
This was back before. This was during Reed College.
The movie is not chronological.
No.
Okay.
But I had Polish jokes. I don't think Steve ever dropped by and saw it because I think it was while he was at Reed.
But tell me if this joke was one of the jokes you wrote. I liked it a lot.
I didn't write it, but I read it.
What's long and hard that a Polish bride gets on her wedding night? A new last name.
I had the jokes of the time were Polish jokes. You buy the books. It was the hottest selling joke book ever in the United States, and I
Right.
just told those jokes as quick as I could. Short little jokes, the most called single line number in the United States, I'm sure. I kept the joke so short without any extensions, a number
Right.
without extensions, yeah.
And that's how you met your wife, right? Through dial
Yes.
Yeah, my first wife, I met her because she was a caller, and I would take live calls sometimes and play with them,
A lot like
their
this
heads.
show. Take a live call.
And that was in the days when it was illegal to connect your machine to the telephone line, right?
Correct.
Where,
So I-
where did you
so
get that
I had
answering
to,
machine?
I had to lease the machine from AT&T, the monopoly, at their price, and it cost almost as much as my apartment rental. I'm a young engineer, and you know your apartment rental's number one. Who could ever afford another half of that just for an answer machine? But I wanted to do this dial-a joke, yeah.
Wow.
So that was
dedicated.
But remember, I was working at Hewlett-Packard designing calculators, which were the iPhone 5 of their day. and I was coming home at night, really, I was bored and doing my own electronic projects, one after another, and that was just one of many.
So Steve comes to your house and sees this computer terminal you're working on. That's what you called it, a computer terminal. Is that what it was?
Yeah, this comes at a much later point in time. Steve and I both had gone over to a friend's house, Captain Crunch, John Draper of the old Blue Box phone freaking fame.
Right.
And here John was working as an engineer designing a portable phone for somebody. Portable phones didn't exist yet. Portable phones in your home did not exist yet. And then he sat down at a terminal, a teletype, and he started typing, and he said, I'm playing chess with a computer in Boston. What? He said, there's this network, and he printed out a list of about 8 colleges that were on this network, and you could log in to pick college number 4, Stanford, and log in as a guest. And by typing the right things, you could actually see files and read things and all this stuff. Whoa, it was just like Pong. I said, I have to have this ability. One of the things that made me Superman. So I went and I actually just designed the chips using my television, like with Pong. Snake a wire to the inside and attach it, solder it to the right point inside the television, and it would actually print the words on my TV. So now I could type on a keyboard I bought. Expensive, most expensive thing I ever bought in all of the ways.
$100?
$60.
Oh my God, $60.
And that was for uppercase only. It was a special deal. And the microprocessor didn't even cost that much in the end. But I could type to the computer in Boston, and it could type back to my TV, and that was the terminal. And I did all my own. And then Steve came down back from Oregon and saw it, and he went to the local. There's a time-sharing company that would lease out expensive terminals, teletype mechanical machines, and some very expensive video terminals. We couldn't afford those. We'd just go down to the office of Call Computer and type in on their machines with a free account they gave us. So Steve said, let's sell them your terminal. And yeah, Computer Converser got called, and we actually made it. Steve turned it into a product and sold it to them. We split the money.
Oh, really? So how many did you sell?
I can't remember if it was 25. It was some small number because they didn't have a lot of customers. It was.
So you were selling computers before Apple.
This was not a computer. This was a
was just a
terminal.
Right.
But it was a very short step before that terminal just got a little addition that made it a computer.
And did it have a modem built in?
No, I built my own modem.
Wow.
Yeah, I built my modem, but you could use anything. The first time I used it with modems, I had those kind of acoustic modems where you take the whole telephone handset into a speaker and a microphone, and yeah. But it worked.
That summer of '76, I was doing work for Alex Camrad, building his
Alex
modem.
Camrad was the guy at the Call Computer,
Yes.
which was the time-sharing computer system that bought these terminals from us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, did you have to offer this product to HP first?
That one, I didn't even think of it. Didn't even think of it for HP because we weren't doing anything like that.
Yeah.
It wasn't something like an HP product, and no, that wasn't close enough.
Okay. So later you designed what was to be the Apple I, and that's the thing that HP passed on.
Well, I think we're working towards it in this chronology.
I'm looking.
But-
This is the movie chronology.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
when things really happen.
Okay, somewhere they show Steve coming to just, he says, we got to make a computer. He comes to this revelation.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm going to go down and find Woz, and he'll have it. And my gosh, I was already going to the Homebrew Computer Club. I had turned my terminal into a full computer with a microprocessor, dynamic memory, all the elements that really made a useful computer affordable. And I was showing it off at each club meeting every 2 weeks. I'd haul my TV set down in the back of my car, set it up on a table, type in all the code for 40 minutes that was the basic language and all that, and I would demonstrate it. And people would crowd around me. And I'd show them what it did, I was too shy to talk, basically, but other people would come. I had a big crowd following me. And then Steve Jobs wasn't ever at the club because he was up in Oregon. So he came down from Oregon. I said, you got to come see this computer I built. I'm going down to the club tonight. And he came down. So it was like I pulled him to the club, and I showed him what it was, and he saw all the people around me, and he got this idea. We could sell them. I'd given away my design for free because I wanted to help them be able to build their own computers because they wanted to change the world. They wanted to improve education and communication. We had Stanford professors that talked glorious talk about where these little have your own computer was going to take us all, and the little nerds like me that were never noticed were going to be the most important people in our companies. I loved that stuff, and so I gave it away to help all these people do their thing. So Steve knew we didn't own it or anything, and he said, let's build a part of it. Let's build a PC board that helps them put it together in an hour instead of 40 hours. And I think that was in the movie. I don't remember.
Well, this is complete opposite of the movie. The movie had Steve Jobs trying to convince you to come to Homebrew. You say, I don't want to go.
No.
And then they showed you.
I've been there since day one. I was
Right.
one of the first people to ever attend the first meeting of that club.
And they showed you being really shy and no one caring about what you were doing, when in reality,
I
everyone
was
crowding around you.
I was shy, and I was pretty much a nerd. But yes, in the showing off time, after the main meeting where I was too afraid to ever raise a hand, I got inspired by everything. I would go out, and we had tables. We called it the random access period.
Right.
And I would set up my stuff on tables they had, plugged into the wall, and I would demonstrate it. And all these people that were building other machines, the early little machines, like the polymorphics and IMSCI guys, they're looking over my shoulder, and they're sort of seeing it's a whole set of chips that's affordable, doing the entire job, including a programming language. So yeah. So I was kind of a little silent star. But no, I had a very, very much a following and spoke their language, and they were all technicians in this club at the early days. They all wanted to build their own computer. So Steve came and just wanted to figure out a way to turn it into money, because every time I had an invention, no, that's how he thought, and that's good. No, that's good. Thank God. Thank God for him. Yeah.
We have to pause right now. We have to take a short break, and we come back. We'll pick up at the Homebrew Computer Club, and we'll be reading some of your tweets and messages. So, see you in about a minute and a half or 2 minutes or something. Okay. I totally messed up the opening. I didn't read my cards, and so I think I missed
my God.
a bunch of stuff.
Oh no, FCC's gonna get you.
I need to move your mic a little, please.
I did that.
You can always undo one button.
You were at Berkeley, right?
And then put it down between them and redo the button.
Not
if you
when
want.
Woz was there.
I'm trying to remember what
Weird sometimes when they touch the mics.
Lee Felsenstein's
they're just
community
getting
memory
Scratches.
would have been about the
worst
same
things are when
time.
they have those mics attached to one
76?
ear.
Because
Yeah.
You ever work with
community
beards, they
memory
all
was
just fall off,
before
and I
the
hold them
Sol.
to- I have
And
to
the
hold
Sol
them
was
on.
by
No,
70.
sometimes you don't listen.
The
Sometimes
Sol
it's
was
just
by
mine.
77.
But it just never stays
Do you remember
on.
community
I have to
memory?
kind of
Did you
hold it
ever-
on 'cause the
I
tape comes
heard of
loose
it,
on
but
up
I
here.
never really used it. I got there August '76.
Oh,
And
right.
when I got there,
there's
I
water
was
in
there
there.
for 3 days when
Cherry
I
Coke.
walked down University Avenue there looking for a bite store. And I guess I found the address of it. Found it on University
That's right.
Avenue.
You came to Berkeley as a grad student.
Yeah.
So you were
I was there '76.
just 1 year for a master's.
No, for '79. Through '79.
2 years.
3 years.
3 years for a master's.
I was a PhD student, and I had passed my prelims.
Really? Did Steve talk you into dropping out?
No,
Like
I-
Bud?
Well, I got into the Apple too, and he offered me a job.
Right.
And I should have dropped out because I missed a 4-to-1 stock split. If I had started when they had given me, I would have got 4 times as much stock. But instead, well, I thought I need to get a master's degree, and because I was there for 3 years, I shouldn't just drop out.
Right.
And so that ended up costing.
Yeah, he told me he gave you 8 times as much stock though when it finally came. Just joking.
So I was going to ask you the community memory. So at the time the homebrew started in '75, had Lee Felsenstein had already built community memory?
Community Memory existed in Palo Alto. I had heard of it. I'd never been there. People's Computer Company was associated with it.
Right.
Yes, and that was where the Homebrew Club spun off
And
from.
it was a terminal.
I'd never heard of it in
was
my
a
life.
terminal with a modem.
I didn't know a thing about them, what they had, what they did.
And it used a lease.
That was the same mentality.
Yeah.
So when the Homebrew Club started, yeah.
So I was going to ask if you had seen that and were inspired by it. I guess not.
Actually, let me finish this and pour it in so they don't see the logo.
Right behind the Apple logo.
Booth is almost ready, John.
Okay.
Well, the Apple logo and the Coca-Cola logo. How interesting today.
Just make sure you put the apple on top. 4, 2.
And we're back. And we left off at the Homebrew Computer Club. We're going to continue some more. But before we get into that, on the way to the meeting, famously,
So that scene really
Yeah.
offended me because it was like him taking me when I was taking him.
It offended me
And
too.
also, the idea of what computers meant to the world had come from, Daniel was just talking about, well, there was People's Computer Company and Community Memory and little computers that they were trying to share with the public.
Ted Nelson's book was
the
out
good
then,
thinking,
too. That was
the good thinking that led to the Homebrew Computer Club had been going on in these spheres. And yeah, so I was there telling Steve how it was going to improve education and how we were going to be able to type messages in, people could read them an hour later, you know, and know that the anti-war march had been changed to a different route and all this stuff, you know. So that was exciting for me.
And Steve was paying attention, and soon it was his idea.
And I'd given my computer away because I wanted to help these things happen.
so on the way, it says that Jobs was into Bob Dylan and you were into the Beatles. Now, is that true?
Well, wait, is this the point we're at?
Yeah, we're,
You know,
we're
no.
driving to. We're
Yeah,
driving to
no,
Homebrew.
that was actually offensive to me, because when I met Steve Jobs, he was in high school. You know, I was in college. He didn't have any Beatles albums, I don't think. He knew that there was this one song like Rolling Stone, and he loved this one phrase: "When you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose." Because he liked walking around with nothing but peanuts, but a little thing of nuts in his hand. No. And he liked to quote that line. And so I took all my albums and I showed him the liner notes. I showed him the vague, strange words that Dylan wrote, you know, songs like Desolation Row, and brought him into all that. And then I drove him down to record stores. We walked San Fernando Street and a few others near San Jose State College. And I knew how to ask for bootleg records because I'd bought them before. And then we went in Berkeley and we bought bootleg records. And I shared all that Dylan stuff with him. And we became big Dylan fans. And he said, "Do you think Dylan or the Beatles are more important?" And I said, "Oh, Dylan, you know, because I'm into words and the lyrics and the meaning. And they have life." And he says, "Yeah, Beatles is nice music." But we both agreed. Dylan was the place to be, you know, for us. We were more into the intellectual side of songs like Dylan than the little Beatles pop stuff. So why do they portray me as being Beatles pop in that car? It's okay. You know, it's okay to portray somebody there. They had Steve Jobs right. They just had me the wrong person.
Right. After the Homebrew Computer Club meeting, Paul Terrell, who ran the Byte Shop, stops one of you. Now, in the movie, he stops Steve Jobs.
This is correct. Well, Paul Terrell had been watching me at the club. He knew about the computer. I had not become personal friends with him. There were a lot of stages that are left out of here. How did this become a company? Because I worked for Hewlett-Packard, and I wasn't going to start a company and then get fired for having a company on the side. So I offered the computer to my company first, and they turned me down a lot of times, but they wouldn't have built the nice, fun machine a personal computer is supposed to be. They would have built a tool for engineers. So it's a good thing they turned us down. And then we were in business. We decided to go into business, but Steve's idea was to build a PC board for $20 and sell it for $40. We'd have to put in a few $100 each, maybe $1,000 total. We'd make maybe 100 PC boards, and if we sold 50 of them, we would get our money back. That's what we needed to break even. didn't know if we'd do it. He didn't know if we'd do it, you know, but heck, we wanted our own company. We've been doing things together for a long time, so Apple started. Now we made a PC board. I took it in, showed it to my engineer friends at HP, and the phone rang. And Steve said, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "Okay." And he said, "Well, I got a $50,000 order." $50,000 when you have no money in the bank, no savings accounts, no relatives and friends to loan you money. This was a shock.
Yeah.
I was going to have to go back through HP's legal department to make sure I wouldn't lose my job at Hewlett-Packard. That was number one to me. And what happened was Steve kind of described it like he had gone in and told them they should sell completely built computers. But later on, what I found out was he was trying to sell them our board, our PC board, and the guy at the store said, all these people are coming and buying kit computers. What they want is a complete built computer. And so Steve said, well, we can give you a complete built computer. So Paul Terrell was the idea, saying this is what people really want. And we gave them a completely built board. That means all the parts and components are soldered onto it, but you still had to know enough to hook wires over to transformers, a television of some sort, and a keyboard. You kind of had to supply a wooden case. So the store, in the end, not only bought them from us for $500, but then they had to buy a wooden case from somebody who would make some wooden cases, buy a few transformers from Radio Shack, and maybe a little monitor to put it into a TV set, a modulator. It's called, because TVs didn't have video in those days. They only had an antenna. You had to broadcast on channel 3 or channel 33
I remember
or something.
that. I had like a little box. It would be channel 3 or 4, and you'd switch TV or computer.
So Paul Terrell, in his bite shop in Mountain View would sell the complete setup, kind of like IKEA. You have to put a few pieces together, but not too hard.
So they'd sell your computer with their monitor and their keyboard and their case.
Yeah, they sold the whole thing. They might have sold it complete. I never went down to the store to see. They might have sold it just here it is.
You
take
didn't
it
need
home
a
and plug
monitor.
it
It
in.
worked with your TV set.
Yeah, it worked with your TV. No monitor
Right.
even. That was one of the real keys to making it affordable.
You couldn't even buy a monitor, really.
So
You're selling for $500 a piece, right?
yes, and you know what? And yeah, Steve told me that Paul was a little bit upset because he had been expecting that we were going to deliver a complete computer in a case. Like the one I'd been showing off at the club, Randy Wigginton's father had made me a wooden case, with the keyboard. It kind of looked like a typewriter.
And it wasn't $500. It was $666.
No, it was $500
okay.
Wholesale to Paul
Okay.
Terrell. And then we said,
yeah.
what should we make for a retail price? Add a third, that makes it $667.
Right.
And I was into repeating digits, so $666.66.
Not the mark of the beast.
Right. So when you want to start building these, Steve Jobs and Daniel, they were living together, and then they moved into Steve's parents' garage to build these, right?
Yeah, Daniel wasn't around when we did the first couple prototypes, but we got the boards, and they were for $13. Every part was soldered into the board, except the chips had sockets. So we had all these chips, and then we went to we paid Steve's daughter sister Patty. We paid her to plug a board to plug in the chips to the first set of boards. I don't know if she did 10 boards, 25, 5, 3, whatever.
Yeah.
So the first boards, and then Dan showed up. Steve wanted Dan to come out and help out. It's time to have somebody help us. So Dan showed up, and we set up the table out in the garage. And then Dan would be, from then on, I think Dan was the one who's plugging in the chips and testing them.
So it started
I was
out,
the first tester. I had to teach him what to look for.
So it starts out in the garage with Steve Jobs, you, Bill Fernandez, Daniel, Chris Espinosa, all working there in the garage, right?
It was
And
that was it's time compression.
Yeah.
The movie has to only.
Right.
Chris came by at least once that I remember,
Yeah.
and could type in a few things, but he wasn't really working like. It was more like he was part of the interested community.
Well, he was 14 years old, for one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We invited Chris to be on the show because he's still at Apple, but Apple said he's not allowed to be on the show, so he couldn't come. Unfortunately.
Too complicated.
So is it true that Chris worked for free at the beginning, or did you pay him money?
No, I'm sure he just came by to see what we were doing, really.
Yeah.
No, and Bill Fernandez, I'm not sure if he ever came to the garage. Bill was the one that introduced me to Steve. Bill worked as a technician in my group at Hewlett-Packard for me.
Okay.
And and I suggested him, so when we started Apple, I said, this was later on when we started Apple with money. The second start, the corporation with the Apple II. So Bill Fernandez came along at a later time, but I don't remember him doing anything on the Apple I's. He certainly knew about them because I was well known for having done it in my group at Hewlett-Packard, where Bill worked.
Okay.
Bill told me he did work in the garage in the spring of '77. I don't know. I think, the first Apple II boards needed some massaging. Rod Holt, right? Rod Holt had
That was
Rod
that was
Holt
after.
came
Yeah, that was after
for
we
Apple
brought
II,
in
yeah.
because Bill Fernandez really was employee number 3. He had agreed to come with Steve and I, but he had to wait to a certain date that Hewlett Packard would let him go.
Okay.
So in the meantime, our investor Mike Markula was sort of the third one sitting down in our new little office building we'd gotten, and he was sort of like the third one on the spot as employee number 3, and Bill got number 4. But no, Bill was as early as could be, so willing to join us. Take the risk.
In the movie, when you delivered the Apple I boards to Paul Terrell, in the movie, he's complaining that's not a complete computer. And he goes, they're just boards, they're not computers.
The Apple I, not the Apple II.
The Apple I, right. In the movie, you were complaining, about the Apple I. Like, it's not just a board. How dare you? This is high technology. You've never seen anything like this before.
I never came close to dealing with sales, finance, any of that stuff. You know what? No, that was Steve's end.
Okay.
I had so much to constantly develop on my end. My head was sunk into it. No.
Well, here's
I would not even talk that way anyway. I would just sort of agree.
Didn't
Here's
sound
a
like
good
you.
question, though. You probably would have advocated to Steve that you, meaning Apple, would actually sell it with the keyboard and the power supply, so it was a complete set of parts.
We would have, in those days, it was like we would have talked to each other about ideas and trade them off and see what makes sense. And we could have come to that conclusion, and it was pretty easy. But you have to remember, before we shipped an Apple I, we had the Apple II working and demonstrated.
Okay.
Okay, so we knew the real machine that would change the world. The Apple I was not designed to be a computer to change the world. It was a quick modification of a terminal I had to be my own computer. As quick as could be. That was the quickest, shortest step, but it wasn't really designed from the ground up like the Apple II. And the Apple II had so many incredible ideas. You know what? They weren't possible when the Apple I was built. Color. A lot of the way that the computer memory was on your screen wasn't possible with the Apple II. Had to do it by the time we built the Apple II. The memory could go at 2 million times a second, and the microprocessor only went at 1, so that left another 1 for the screen. I mean, it's hard to say, but anyway, the Apple II we knew was so great, and yet we had to market the Apple I in the meantime.
So in the movie, you see Steve Jobs leaving the Byte Shop and giving little hints to Paul Terrell that, the next one's going to be great, and he had already seen that it's going to be color, and it's going to be an all-in-one, and that kind of thing.
You know what they left out? They left out PC-76. Dan and Steve were in a booth out in Atlantic City. My first airplane flight out of the state of California, except for a year at Colorado school. And so we're out in Atlantic City, and I'm up in my room in the hotel because I'm kind of shy. I don't like dealing with people. And I'm sitting there programming in new additions to the BASIC. Steve would run up and he'd get a brand new EEPROM and plug it in and have some more commands to show people. And he and Dan were showing off our computer, and we went down late at night. There was one guy with a projector. I had come up with a strange way of generating color that was unlike anything ever in any book. In the books, you gave a number to a device that converted it into sine waves of certain types that showed up as color on your TV set. What I did was I just took a number, and I said, send the number out, and it shows up as color because of the way TVs work. And it would have to work, but would it work on this projection TV? We went down late at night when nobody was around because all these other people, two people like us, 2 young people, had little companies, with pieces of hardware. Went down and we hooked it up to this guy's projector, and it worked. And he said, "This is the computer I want." It was the Apple II, which was not being shown at the show.
You brought the Apple II
brought it down at night.
prototype?
Yes,
you brought it to Atlantic City?
Yes,
You'd be fired
we
for that
showed
now.
it, and we showed it. And but the guy said she saw every one of the little starting computer attempts, including the Apple I, and he said, "This is the one I want." The color and the games. I mean, so
wow.
But we still wanted to market the Apple I because we had started on it. It was business. I wasn't going to interfere with that, and we made some money.
So when you started working on the Apple II, that's when I guess Rod Holt came into the scene. And he was
Yes.
your power supply designer.
The Apple II, we started heading towards having a real company, and before Rod Holt, it was financing. Mike Marklow was shown in the movie, and Steve Jobs says, I got this guy, and I dictate the terms. Like he was dictating the terms, and he was the leader. No, Mike Marklow was the leader. He was the financial, you know, he had a lot of experience in investing, and he knew how to set up a company. He was also a very nice guy, and I'm glad that he saw in Steve Jobs what people like Nolan Bushnell at Atari did. And so Mike put the money in. Now the plan was, Steve had this plan that it was his own idea, a plastic case for a computer, which had never been done. And Steve knew of these guys that pressed motorcycle seats with a foam process. And this guy could actually process, you know, press the foam into cases. The trouble is they don't all kind of come out the exact same shape. There's a lot of problems with that process, and you can only make a certain amount a day. But we were going to have a plastic case, and Steve had a friend at Atari, Rod Holt. You know, he had a few friends there. And Rod was a guy that knew how to design a new type of power supply, a switching power supply. I had just designed the old linear, normal type of power supply myself, but the switching power supply cost more money, but it ran cooler. It was high-tech instead of low-tech. And oh my gosh, and Steve wanted to go for the high-tech approach, and one thing it gave us was it would keep things cool inside the plastic. We wouldn't need a fan. Which became a mantra of Apple for a long time. And by bringing in, basically we used brains to do things that other people weren't doing with their computers. Rod came in and designed that switching power supply, and I remember talking to him at night, and he would tell me how he was a communist. And actually, I admired him as an engineer. So I started giving a lot of validity. There must be some validity from a logical thinking point of view to communism. I've never had time to go research it and read Marx and all that stuff, but it's probably not too illogical.
You know, Rod later became the publisher of Socialist Viewpoint magazine.
I don't know that. I'm not political, so.
So before the Apple II launched, Steve Jobs was seen as saying that the Apple I is being sold in 6 stores. Is that correct, or are you only being sold in the Byte Shop?
Oh, before the Apple IIs launched, we got into stores out in, the Midwest, Wisconsin or something, New York. He had one favorite guy in New York City.
I see.
I drove down once to Southern California where I had relatives, and I stopped by this one thing said computer store or something computers in Orange. The city of Orange, I think. And I drove in and I showed him the Apple I, which I was carrying with me, and what it would do and how you could play Star Trek on it. And that guy ordered 10 or 12 or 15 of our Apple I computers, and he set them up and charged people to come in after school and play this text game. Black and white text game, Star Trek on them. So that was another place. So we had sales, I think, all over the place. Steve would get on the phone anytime a new store opened in the country. Remember, this was a new business. Nothing existed. There weren't stores where they were sold. A new store would pop up, and Steve would get on the phone, tell him what we could ship you for how much money and probably what terms. And that was, he did all the business. You know, his room, the phone in his room was busy.
Right. So the movie switches now, and we cut to a scene where Chris Ann tells Steve Jobs that she's pregnant.
Let's see.
Quite a dramatic scene.
1977.
Chris Ann tells Steve Jobs that she's pregnant. And then Jobs says it's not his child. And so then he yells at her and throws her out of the house. I guess the 3 of you were living together, right?
Yeah. No, he didn't throw her out, but he was mean.
Yeah. And at this point, you know, you were the one comforting Chris Ann.
I tried to actually kind of stay in the middle of the two of them.
By this point in time, Steve was worth a bit of money, and he probably wanted an abortion. And maybe she had an abortion before.
Really?
So she wasn't against it. And I think that bothered Steve that this time she was not going to have the abortion because maybe he had the money.
Oh, okay.
And Chris Ann has a book coming out in a couple of weeks that tells her side of the story.
Okay. And I think you told me once that you think you and Steve grew apart because, you know, he was mean to her and you were trying to, you know, be nice to her.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
No?
People speculate that.
Oh.
I don't actually think so.
I
was, you know, the dynamic was Steve and I had a very similar sense of humor. And Steve and I and Chris Ann spent a lot of time together. And Chris Ann was always feeling like Steve and I were ganging up on her, which really wasn't true. It's just that we had the same kind of sense of humor. And
I never got that from. I was working right in the lab with Dan at the time, and he never came across that way. He was a little bit wondering why Steve didn't denied it, though. You know, it was so obviously, you know,
What?
his child.
So you think Steve really thought it wasn't his child, or do you think he just couldn't handle
I think he just couldn't handle it.
So he knew it was his, but
Chris Ann didn't have any other boyfriends,
Yeah.
and he didn't have any other, you know.
right.
I don't know.
All right.
It did cost Steve quite a bit, though,
Oh yeah.
because yes, they were Time Magazine decided to make him Man of the Year. Michael Moritz came out and talked to a lot of people and heard stories about how little he'd paid off and denied this child and all that, and those sort of things. They decided instead of making him Man of the Year, they made it Machine of the Year on Time Magazine.
Oh.
They changed their direction. They wrote a real scathing article inside, basically based on this baby and denial and
Right.
low payment, low settlement.
So then in the movie, they jump to the West Coast Computer Fair in 1977, where you have the first public unveiling of the Apple II. Is that correct?
I don't think there ever was a speech like there was in the movie.
No
They had
speech.
Yeah.
Steve
But-
like giving a launch, and there wasn't really
Just a bunch of
anything like
booths
that. I
in a
was there.
room.
As a matter of fact, I think even before Mike Markla put his money in, Steve and I had sat down and looked over where you could get the booths, and there was one premier spot, and we had selected, let's get that. And Steve wasn't sure if we wanted to spend that much money, and I said, we should. And we both were for it, yeah. So we had the prime spot in the show, and we knew we had the product. We knew we had the product that was going to change the world.
And that's the first time people saw it at the computer fair.
Yeah, and you know, it was still a techie world where people just wanted to come and see what was this all about. I thought it was unbelievable, thousands of people, you know. And Mike Markla, our funder, who had said things like, in 5 years we'll be a $500 million company. As we were leaving that show, all we've done is show this little computer that you can type a few programs in and run things. We're leaving the show, and Mike Markla put his arm across my shoulder, and he said, you know, he could tell from that show it's going to happen. This is going to be the new next market. Yeah.
He was right.
So then the movie jumps from there straight to 1980. We see Steve Jobs parking in a handicapped spot, which he did, because when I worked at Apple, I'd always walk by his handicapped spot, and his silver Mercedes would be parked there with no license plates.
Right?
So that part is true. And now 1980, it shows him starting to work on the Lisa. That's what the time he started working on Lisa. in
Actually,
1980?
before that, Lisa, people were working on Lisa toward the end of '78.
Okay.
So quite a bit before that.
Yeah, Steve was very, very anxious from the early days of the computer, you know, that, somebody's going to be competition, we've got to move, we've got to design new things, make newer things, and that he moved us into the Apple III first, which was a business version of the Apple II.
Uh-huh.
And it kind of died. We don't have to go into all the reasons. But then,
But
there was
you
this guy,
did
Jeff
you not
Raskin.
like the Apple III? We all loved it. We thought it was great because it had all the things built in. Right?
I love the Apple.
You know
I
what?
like it.
I would have loved the Apple III, except for I loved my Apple II software.
Yeah.
And I love the Apple II also. And the Apple
Right.
III, to get around that, built in the Apple II, but wrongly.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
limited and cut out the features you wanted. So it was a bad Apple II. And it also failed in hardware on day one. And once you get a bad name, it's so hard to ever build the market that it deserved. It was not a bad computer. It was a good computer. I absolutely say that. But anyway, you need software, and it takes time to build a market for that. So Steve, then Jeff Raskin had come into the company. He'd actually been around early. He came by the garage in the garage days once, and he told us how you've got to put a lot of work into your machines to make them so obvious they work simple for the person who hasn't had education, that doesn't know computers on the inside. And so Jeff Raskin was one of the key people that knew about what was going on at Xerox PARC Center. And so he said, you've got to get down there, and basically led us to going down to see what Xerox PARC Center had. You know, menus on a screen and multiple windows opening like you had more than one computer in one, and mouses, and it was just so impressive. You just knew if you had that, you'd never go back to what you had before.
So then they say, we see Steve Jobs
And that initiated the Lisa project.
working with the Lisa guys.
Lisa actually was started before the Xerox PARC trip and had a bitmap display before it, but no mouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they saw the mouse.
we'd hired some pretty smart technical people and a few smart what do you call it? Personal interface. You know, human using computer type
Bill
people.
Atkinson was really the key guy, and he was Jeff's student at UC
San Diego.
Both
right.
Jeff and Bill and Bud
Yes.
Tribble, but Bud Tribble didn't come till a little later.
And then Steve fires a guy who doesn't think they can do fonts because that guy didn't share
I
the
think
passion.
that's made
They
up.
just
That's-
made that
yeah.
up.
But they did actually fire Lisa, engineering manager, who didn't want to add the mouse.
Oh,
Bill Atkinson tells that story that
Really?
the guy didn't want to do the mouse. The engineering's too complicated, and Bill mentioned it to Steve, and then the next thing you heard, the guy was gone.
we asked Bill Atkinson to be on the show tonight, but he responded saying, "I live in New Mexico."
Really?
He does along with Bill Fernandez.
Now you're talking Bill Fernandez.
Oh, I messed him up.
Yeah,
Sorry, Bill
right,
Fernandez
right,
is in New Mexico. Bill Atkinson, he lives in Oregon now.
Lives in
No,
Woodside.
no,
Woodside.
No, he still lives.
I could have
same
had him on
place.
the
Busted.
Busted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time for a break.
Maybe we should stop for a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Apple IPO. You don't want to miss that.
You already did.
All right.
I
How
go to
we-
the bathroom.
Oh, you want to do a bathroom break? Yeah, yeah.
I'd like to.
Okay.
Where is it?
So this is
Go
how
into
it should
the-
have ended, the long
Go into the hallway where you first
What?
got into the building.
How it should
Right.
have ended, the long
Turn left to first right.
Seen that website, how it would have ended.
Disconnect the mic. Your mic is
Watch
on.
out for your.
Movies.
Oh,
Main hall left and then
We got a guy there.
Anyone else need to go? Y'all have enough water?
Do we have enough tape running? Is it a 2-hour tape or 1 hour
It's a
tape?
1 hour tape.
Okay.
hey.
1 hour tape. Wow.
So we're going to use up
So I don't have
2
to
of
get
them.
up. Can you just toss that somewhere else?
Does it feel like you've been going for an hour?
Well,
It doesn't hear.
It's been 55 minutes. Yeah. How long does it feel
about
for
right.
you?
It only does for me. The way I measure time is what I still have to do, and I have a speech tomorrow that I haven't written.
oh my gosh.
Now you should just take this recording and use it. It's pretty good.
Some of the guys you guys mentioned with, John Draper and all, I remember them very well.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, actually, when we started Apple with the Apple II, AT&T got broken up. You were allowed to attach things to a phone. And I remembered my dial-a-joke. I wanted to take a computer to program a machine that put tones out to dial numbers, could answer the phone, could turn on and off relays to start and stop tape recorders, and interface them correctly to the phone line. Who knows phone circuits? John Draper. So I hired him at Apple
As long
in
as we
the
need.
earliest days, and they put just he and I
don't know.
and Randy Wigginton in a little off office away from everybody else.
Well, you know,
And he developed the board. It was called the Charlie board, and it did things modems wouldn't do, like being able to hear if it got answered, if it was busy, if it was, you know, all those different tones on the line, and you could program it in BASIC to look for tones. Great board, yeah. But but we never put it out because the people at Apple didn't like him, and it took more people to make a product than just designing it.
yeah. Well, the thing is, thanks to John Draper, I actually got my start in in the stock market.
Really?
He brought me into his little office. Remember that little shack of an office they had out in the
I don't
middle of
know.
nowhere?
I don't know.
Okay, at any rate, the thing was, I saw the very, very, very first line printer. And I heard bap, 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 and paper was just flying. So I didn't invest in line printer. I went out and invested in the company that made the paper for the printer.
Good, good.
I mean, because it was going bap, 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 but just still a paper.
Might have been Call Computer where you were. He worked at Call Computer. I
it's
remember though
just
when
a
he was
small-
in prison though, a couple of years later after he'd worked for me at Apple,
Yeah.
he called up crying that the computer I'd given him, the printer had broken or gotten stolen. And I felt so sorry for him. They'd just come out with the first letter quality printer. The first printer that was a reasonable cost that could make business quality documents.
Daisy wheel?
Yeah, it was no, it wasn't a daisy
Was
wheel.
it the
Yeah,
the modified
it wasn't
Selectric?
selectric. It was daisy wheel. And so I actually had one. I bought one. I gave it to him. I said, "Here, take this. You can use this." Because he was in prison working on a word processor, and he was so sad that he was stymied. When he got done, he had the only business word processor for the Apple II, and the Apple II sales were shooting up in the business market because of VisiCalc. So he made $1 million.
Well, no, the funniest
He made
thing,
$1 million
the
on it.
funniest thing about it was IBM Draper software
Yes.
to launch the IBM PC with,
Yeah.
and that's
That was
where
their
he really
official-
made the money.
their official word processor.
Just thinking about IBM and Draper together.
Yes, that's funny.
Makes me laugh.
Where's one word for it? Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2.
And we're back. And now we jump to the part of the movie where it's the IPO for Apple. Now we see Daniel, you're trying to meet up with Steve Jobs to say hi to him because you were good friends, and he's been blowing you off, I guess, for a long time. And you plan to meet at Good Earth. And I've eaten at Good Earth. And now it's a Panera Bread and a Pete's Coffee and Tea. But back then, and was he trying to dodge you at that point?
Yeah, he wouldn't talk to me anymore.
You want to talk to you anymore? What do you think got between you? Just he was trying to associate himself with business people?
I don't think. I think
Might have been
he-
partly.
I think he just had his mind on other things. Really, I just needed a little career advice.
Uh-huh.
You know, not like I expected anything in particular, but
Right.
he really just kept me waiting. It's not like we had a lunch date that was broken, but
Right.
but he really never would. He wouldn't talk to me that summer at all.
Okay. We see an attorney meeting with him, telling him, hey, sign this paper so you can visit Lisa. And he's still denying at this point that Lisa is his child.
Yeah, probably.
Do you remember when he admitted that she was actually his? Was he like many,
I
many
remember
years
when
later?
he started really spending time with her, and
Yeah?
he introduced her to me, and so that was in 1986. So that was quite a bit later.
Yeah.
When she was 8.
But yeah, when she was 8.
And he's meeting with different attorneys, and they're discussing stock options. And Steve Jobs is saying all these people, they don't deserve stock options. All these early founders. So there's you, there was Chris Espinosa, there was Randy Wigington, and a bunch of guys he said don't deserve
The Houstons.
stocks.
The guys from the garage.
Yeah. And now the movie shows you complaining to Steve Jobs about that, but they missed the most important detail of that whole
They
thing.
showed me complaining?
They showed you complaining to Steve, saying, "Hey, it's not fair that you guys you didn't give these guys, stock. They were here. They made the company."
Oh, I didn't
with us."
remember that being in the movie. Huh.
But what they missed was what you did for the people who didn't get stock. And why don't you tell the story of what you did for those people?
Well, I took some of those people that had been in the garage in the early days, and I figured I wouldn't have had a reason to do what had gotten me my great wealth if it hadn't been for them. And why do a few people at the top claim the wealth when we wouldn't have even started the company without the others beside us? They were our friends, and you don't desert them. So I gave large amounts of stock to at least some, I forget 5 or 6 of them, that had been there right from the start. And then I did another program to sell a lot of my stock, rather than to some big investor, to sell it at pre-IPO prices so everybody could make sort of the money the house is worth. So all the engineers and marketing people in the company signed up for a WAS plan. The lawyer, had to approve them all as sophisticated investors or something because we weren't public.
Right.
And somehow one day they said, okay, we've approved it. Al Eisenstadt approved it. I was shocked. And we went ahead with that plan too. But it helped a lot of the people in the company, because I came from Hewlett Packard and they gave us stock profit sharing checks every quarter and said they give it a stock and to make you feel like an owner of your company.
So how many people you think you helped out with the WAS plan?
I don't
I
know,
was
40,
one of them.
80?
You
No,
one of them?
the
Yeah,
WAS
I was one
plan.
of
The
them.
WAS plan was pretty much all the engineers.
Yeah,
Pretty
Yeah,
much.
it might have been 80
there
people.
was some bad things though, because to buy that stock cost $10,000. It was going to be worth hundreds of thousands, but you still had to do it. And a lot of people
I limited the amount each person
people
could buy.
People
to be
didn't
fair.
understand how valuable it would be. Some of them. So there were a few people who went around saying, "Oh, I'll give you the money to buy it, but it's really for me." There, one guy, Paul Wyman,
made a
in
lot. I know.
particular,
Some of them made a
he
lot.
made over $1 million by buying up 10 people's shares. For himself, and there were a few others like that too. Who was? I'm trying to think of their names.
I never heard
Well,
that.
But
they,
yeah,
they
oh,
didn't
yeah.
want it. I don't care. That's going to happen. But I helped a lot of people. But
That was
the
a
ones from the early days, I
remarkably-
helped them all out with a very large amount. I don't want to say
including
that.
Daniel, right?
I think so.
Remarkably generous gesture
Yes.
was.
Thank you.
No, and
But
and
you know,
so-
I do what's right, and then I don't have to go my life remembering who did I do it. What was the
Help
amount?
everybody.
I don't.
You don't have to worry about who it was.
So now we're on this subject. So
By the way, the guy who played me in the movie, Josh Gad, wanted them to put that scene in it
Oh, he did.
Really?
of me doing
Because
that,
he knew
and they denied it. Yeah.
Oh wow, bastards.
Well,
My views are not the views of KMVT television or the cities of, you know.
well, but you know so it has to be said the letter that I got from you, or maybe it was your father, or right, the letter that you were going to give me a modest gift, right? That was like 1982, and then or 81. You had
No, it
your
was right before. It was before the
just
IPO.
before
That
that
was
was
80,
before the
December
plane
80.
crash.
Yeah.
And then years went by, and I left Apple in '84, and that gift didn't even happen till '85. So yeah, well,
Doesn't make any sense to me at all.
because you had amnesia, don't you? Do you remember?
Yeah. No, he
But he
doesn't
gave,
remember
those,
crashing
he
his
gave
plane.
those shows before the IPO. That was the point. They were pre-IPO stock. And so and the IPO was December 80.
I think so. Some other screw up in your case.
Something went wrong.
Oh, maybe.
really
I don't
do.
know.
I
I don't know.
really
All I
do.
know is I didn't get that gift from you till 1985.
something
It
really
was
wrong
after
about
I had already
that.
left Apple.
Because
No,
I
but
wasn't even thinking about it by then. I
Anyway.
assumed I had done it.
It made a big difference in my life. Thank you so much.
So the movie shows you quitting on IPO day, but that wasn't the case at all.
No, not
he
at all.
worked
you,
on
you,
the Mac.
you worked on Mac and everything
Yeah.
until like 85, you said?
Yeah.
You worked at Apple?
Late '84, yeah.
84, okay. So,
Well, you know, it's a movie, so they had to cram everything into 90
Right,
minutes
right.
and simplify things. And
so the movie jumps to 1982, and I think this is when,
No, it's
Things-
not 82, 81, I think. I mean, that was when the Mac stuff.
Mac
Right.
started in January of '81.
That's when
Right?
Steve took it
Yeah.
over. Steve took over the Mac in
Oh,
January
And
81.
I was working on the
Okay.
Mac project actually at that time, but then I had a plane crash
Yeah.
in Feb of
So that scene where
81.
Steve
Right.
confronts Jeff Raskin, that's like
okay, well,
December
That was-
80 or January 81.
it says here that we, first, before that happens, Steve's working on the Lisa project,
Right?
and the board tells him, hey man, this is losing lots of money.
Sure, that happened in 1980.
That was in
Yeah.
80 still, okay,
Yeah.
1980. The company is hemorrhaging money because Steve's spending all this money on the Lisa.
That's not true.
No,
the
no,
Apple
no.
the Apple II was
Making
doing
huge amounts of
incredibly
money.
well.
Oh, so you weren't losing money yet?
The Lisa
No.
was a big loser, but
Not yet.
Not yet.
it was a
going to be
failure.
loser.
It was a failure. Yeah, it was a failure. The money going into it, the millions going into it, weren't going to get returned. It was going to cost $20,000 of today's money.
Of today's
10,000 of those money, but that's because of the amount of memory it took to do a machine the right way with proper architecture of the hardware and the operating system. That's what it took. And Steve didn't have the experience and know-how to realize that that's what it took to do the machine the right way. And he said, we got to make a cheap machine to get back at them. That's what he did with the Macintosh, and cut down a lot, made it a single user, run one program type thinking from the start, and it hurt things a lot.
So Steve got fired from the Lisa, and then he got to work on the Mac, which is already in progress.
Sure, but the way the movie
No.
told that was preposterous.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, like Steve didn't even know Bill Atkinson, until it had like Markla telling him about the Mac. But of course,
Right.
he knew Jeff. He knew all that
Yeah.
stuff
Oh.
going on.
Yeah. He didn't just find out about it. Mark Markla didn't
like
say,
he-
there's this project
Yeah.
for you. No.
Oh.
He knew about it. He even
No, what it
called me at
really
the
was
time.
Jeff's Jeff's Macintosh was 6809 based, and that didn't really have a future. But then Burl figured out this amazing trick that allowed him to hook up the 68000, which had a 16-bit data bus with only 8 memory chips. And so it could be really inexpensive.
I'm gonna
And
nod
that's-
like I know what that
And then
means.
that's when Steve got interested. The movie has Steve telling the Mac team to use the 68,000, but that didn't happen. It didn't happen that way.
Right. It shows Bill Atkinson, Burrell, Jeff Raskin, and Chris Espinosa working on the
Yeah,
Mac.
and that's wrong. I mean, Chris was back at UC Berkeley. Chris wasn't there at the time. Steve later talked Chris into dropping out of Berkeley.
When Chris went to Berkeley, this is what I heard, Steve Jobs advised him, be sure to try LSD while you're there. It's great.
I didn't hear that,
I heard this story.
although I knew Chris had took it.
I could believe it.
So then we see, hold on here. So I got
Steve
a...
never told me that.
So Jeff Raskin and Steve Jobs get off on a bad start in the movie. I don't know if that's,
No, I don't. Well, I don't think they got off to a bad start at all. But it was the same. It was like 1982 when Jeff wrote a letter to the board.
No, before that. That was 1981. When
late 81.
Steve
Burrell
Burrell put the 68,000 in the Mac at the very beginning of 1981. That really the end of 1980 was when he was working on it. Steve got really interested then. Jeff was against the 68,000. He thought that would make the machine too expensive. Lisa was paying like $40 or $50 for it, and that was beyond.
My whole thing is, how do you get the disc out?
Yeah, and then Steve started hanging around, and then Jeff got very upset that Steve was kind of usurping. He was telling Burrell what to do. Jeff had particular software ideas that Steve didn't like. Steve's idea was to take all the software Bill Atkinson wrote for the Lisa and run that on the Mac. That wasn't Jeff's idea, and so there was a lot of tension.
So there's a scene where Jobs goes off recruiting for the Mac. And I actually have, we got a question from Adam Rosen of the Cult of Mac website. He says, if I recall correctly, the movie portrays Steve Jobs asking Andy Hertzfeld, are you good? And you answered, I think so. And Jobs drafts him for the Mac team. And then you said, what's a Macintosh?
No, that's confused. It was Bill Fernandez in the movie, in this fictional movie. He asked Bill Fernandez first, and he had the Bill Fernandez character say, what's a Macintosh? That's all wrong, because Bill Fernandez was in Japan at the time. He wasn't around.
Right.
He didn't start on the Mac till 9 months later.
Yeah.
And so they just threw that in, I guess, because they thought it was funny.
Nobody in the company would have said, what's a Macintosh anyway?
Right.
We all knew what was
So you
that
tell
project.
a funny story in the book, Revolution in the Valley, about how you were working on an Apple II, and then Steve recruited you. How did that go?
Right. Well, they used you already told that story. That's why. Well, it was a little different because the opportunity for me I was helping Burrell with the Mac a little bit on the side anyway, but the real opportunity was they fired all the engineering managers in the Apple II group just one day. Mike Scott decided to in February 1981. They fired 3 of the 4 engineering managers. I came into work.
There weren't a lot of
it
them.
was just chaos, No one knew who was going to be fired next. Everyone, Scotty was firing people one by one, and people
the
were
way
thinking,
that it happened was Scotty actually went to the lab manager, Tom Whitney, and told him, take a 2-week vacation.
Yes.
Really?
And while he was gone, he went around and talked to everybody and figured out who were the slackers, and there always are some. And
were
pretty
quite a
much
few.
he fired a whole ton of people, not just managers.
Yes.
Because I thought Bill Thomas was left as a software manager.
Yeah.
I thought he stayed.
Was he on the
I don't
Apple
think he
II?
got let go, but a lot
Ken
of people got
Victor
let go.
was the software
They got let
manager
go,
that kept-
and there may have been some mistakes in that quick of a process, and eventually it drew the ire of other people in Apple and the board, and Mike Scott was eventually laid off, our president from day
I told
one.
people I was going to quit because they fired a few people I thought were great.
Yeah.
And I was pretty upset about it.
Bob Bishop should not
and
have been
then-
fired.
Yeah, Bob Bishop was fired. And
Was he?
Rick
I
Rick-
didn't
Yes.
know that.
Yeah, he was fired in that.
Man.
Yeah.
Now I feel bad.
Yes. And word got back to Mike Scott, who had done the firing, that I was going to quit, and he didn't want me to quit, so he called me into his office, and he goes, well, what could make you stay? And I said, well, if I could work on the Mac with Burrell and Bud. And then that's when Steve came by. It was kind of it wasn't like Steve's idea.
Steve was walking
for
randomly
that.
down the halls, picking people.
Yeah, no.
But didn't he come to you and unplug your computer?
Yeah, he did. Well, I had gone to Mike Scott, and Scotty told him that I was interested in working on the Mac. So actually I had a meeting first in his office. I had to go to his office. That's where he asked me, are you any good and stuff. And then after that, he went over to the little Mac building where Burrell and Brian Howard were there, and he asked them, am I any good? Do you want that? And then I guess he got positive response enough. Then he came to my desk.
But I thought you were working on the Macintosh before I was.
Before
all this.
Just about the same.
Before Steve took it over.
No,
Yeah, I wasn't there long. I wasn't there long before my
Yeah,
plane
yeah,
crashed.
yeah, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, no, I remember you had a party at your house the weekend right before the plane crash. like on a Friday night, and the plane crash was a Saturday. And at that party, Burl and Bud were both there, who were working on the Mac. And I was talking to them about working on the Mac at that party. It was like your engagement party. You had taken a trip with Candy, like around the world, and you were showing slides of it to everyone at that party, and that was just before the plane crash.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so when the day finally came for you to go to the Mac, did Steve come in and fetch you?
Yes, yeah. And so after I had talked to Scotty some, he came by my desk and he said, "You're working on the Mac now." And I said, "Well, I got to finish. I had just started this new operating system for the Apple II called DOS 4.0 that they had asked me to do." And I wanted to say, of course I couldn't finish it, but I wanted to get it in good enough shape that someone else could take it over. And Steve said, "Are you kidding? The Apple II's obsolete. The Apple II's going to be dead. You know, you got to work on the Mac." And I said, "Just let me finish it up." So he unplugged my computer, carried it away, and so I had no choice to go after him.
Yeah.
And then the funniest thing is he took me to the Mac building, plopped it down on the desk. "This is your desk," and then he left. And I noticed the desk wasn't unoccupied. So there was all the drawers were full of stuff, and it turned out it was Jeff Raskin's desk, who he had just kicked out like the day before.
Oh, so you had missed
So
Jeff Raskin.
I got Jeff had he had cameras and model airplanes and radio controlled cars in the drawers of the desk.
Now, how did you get on the Mac team?
Well, this part must have been in my plane crash because I had amnesia for 5 weeks. But how did I get on? Turns out that my favorite people in the company were working there, and I could have sworn that Andy was already there, and Burl, and Jeff Raskin, the people that I thought the most of for their creative intellect, as creative people who really could do great things. Burl had been just a technician who never went to college, studied, my Apple II designs, and he started designing little computers of his own, that simple and tight with as few parts. So he was definitely my equal in that regard, and I just admired these people. I wanted to be a part of this project.
There was a little Mac team.
I want to be around those people.
Of exactly 5 people before Steve got involved. They were Jeff Raskin, Brian Howard, Bud Tribble, Burl Smith, and Joanna Hoffman. 5 people. And then as soon as Steve really invested himself in it and took it over, he tried to get he got Woz and Rod Holt and Randy Wigington. The early Apple crew, he asked them all.
And he invited me to come.
Yeah, and Dan.
Yes.
And so
jumped at the
Dan,
chance.
so that's when you were working on it. But then the plane crash happened.
At the height of the Mac development, how many people did you have working on it?
At the height? Well, it depends where you define the height.
There was
the biggest
for
number
the
of people.
original Mac, Steve promised us when there were about 50 people in the end of 1982 or mid-1982, he promised us the Mac team would never have more than 100 people.
Right.
He tried to do that until we got up close. But so the concept was the Mac team would have 100 people at most, and that's about how many it had at the time it launched.
So that's by today's standards, that's pretty small.
Yes.
I think,
we thought that was
I don't know.
pretty big.
Every product or every company takes kind of some small group starting.
Yeah, because Mac OS 10, is just software, and there's thousands of people on that.
Sure. But it was a lot simpler. I mean, just the whole operating system was 64 kbytes.
When it was done, did Steve Jobs really call it insanely great?
Yeah, well, that was one of Steve's phrases. He called it that. Not when it was done, but
before.
during the whole time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But now the board is complaining that the Mac is going to cost too much money, and it's running late.
It wasn't really the board. Oh, one thing about that movie that I
totally
thought was
inaccurate.
just completely wrong was the role of Arthur Rock. That movie
Totally.
cast Arthur Rock as the big villain who chased Steve out and all that. There was nothing like that. And well, the other thing was the movie wrote out Scotty. Scotty was not a character in the movie, and he was like
President from the day we started till we went public.
Yeah. He was a huge force there, and so they took some of what Scotty did and they made Arthur Rock do it.
Okay.
Sort of as Steve's nemesis, the person who told Steve he couldn't work on Lisa, etc. I don't know why they did that.
I really like the actor for
They
Arthur
didn't.
Rock.
They didn't really show anywhere near the reality of the reason that Steve had to be let go from Macintosh. They didn't come close to touching on what the real situation was.
So, what was the real situation?
The real situation was that the Mac failed terribly, totally. We had built a factory to build 50,000 of them. We were selling 500 a month. Steve had canceled projects because they could only sell 2,000 a month. Don't even bother designing that one. And so it was that bad, and I think he was taking it real hard that he failed for a third computer he'd tried to create. And his vision didn't include the ability to understand you have to build a market. It's going to take time. You aren't going to sell 50,000 on day one. And meanwhile, we had to save the company. Steve wanted to totally cancel and basically kill off the Apple II. And one thing that he did was the Apple II wanted to use this new Sony floppy disk that everybody in the world was going to use. It was so great. And the Macintosh, and Sony said they were told by Steve Jobs they weren't allowed to sell us the double-sided version because Macintosh would only have the single-sided. See, Steve didn't want the competition. He wanted to by pushing the Apple II down, he'd have less competition for the Mac. But the Apple II was our only revenues in the company. It had been 7 years, and it was still going to be 3 more years that was our only profits running the company. We needed to revive the Apple II, keep it going for a few more years, and build a Macintosh market. And the way we built it was by sending sales reps all over the country to businesses, to universities, to software developers, getting everything we could to build the market. And when we finally did, it supplanted the Apple II market at the same level. But it was going to take time, and Steve didn't have the patience and wanted to basically give up the company to go with to try to put everything into the Mac II, which wasn't ready for sales yet. So it didn't have enough of a computer for the right price yet.
I tell that story a little bit differently in that the Mac did sell a lot of units initially because of its novelty, because of its positive qualities. In June of 1984, it sold over 60,000 units. So they upped the forecast because Christmas was the big time, and they thought they'd sell like 80,000 units. They built 80,000 units to sell in December, and they only sold like 1,000 units or something like that. It really fell off. They had a big boost from the first school, the back to school season there. So in like September and October, it did okay because a lot of students, they had a special program for the university consortium. But then in November is when it really fell off. I was already on leave of absence. But I was still friends with everyone.
The problem is you got to save the company first, and everyone believed in the Macintosh. I believed in it so strongly, and John Scully did. Everyone in there believed in the Macintosh as the future. It's just the execution steps.
There was this thing called the Mac Office, the Macintosh Office that you left out there. But because when the Macs weren't selling, a major mistake they made was trying to focus it on the office market. And that's when, for the big introduction in January 1985, we had the great commercial, the 1984 commercial for January 84. They made this commercial called Lemmings for 1985 that portrayed Apple's customers as lemmings walking off a cliff. Or the IBM customers. The IBM people.
Sorry.
But that was generally considered a disaster. And the whole Macintosh Office thing never really even got developed. They had some bad ideas. The Mac needed a hard disk. That was really the biggest single design mistake that we made, was not putting in a high enough bandwidth way to get a internal hard disk integrated.
And meanwhile, Lisa had a hard drive.
Patience. Don't put out a machine when it's not a good enough machine for the price you're selling this year. Work on it, put it out when it is a good enough machine to sell at the price you're offering.
Part of that with the price was they tacked on an extra $500 at the very end.
By the way, what made the Macintosh finally go was a bunch of people that Steve disdained, led by John Scully, who went out and did all those marketing steps I told about to build the Mac market. They believed in it, but they also opened it up and made color versions. They did those things were very important too in the Mac
thing
revival.
That really saved it was
Steve would have never done that.
PageMaker,
Laser writer,
the desktop publishing industry, which was about the time the Mac Plus came. The Mac didn't have enough RAM, and we knew that. But we wanted to get the price down. But with the 512K, it kind of began to have enough RAM.
RAM prices come down.
Yes.
So eventually the Macintosh had enough RAM. The Lisa was the right machine with the right amount of RAM. It was the wrong year for pricing.
Right.
And we finally got the Lisa back when we got OS 10, actually, is what I like to say. But finally, the Macintosh had a megabyte of RAM, and what did PCs have? 1/8 of a megabyte. So when programs like desktop publishing and Photoshop came out, they had no choice. Only one machine had what they needed.
Right.
So
in the 640K. So more than
in the movie, Steve Jobs blamed the board and John Scully because he thought they priced it too high, and he wanted the price to be lower.
That's partially true. Steve, till his dying day, blamed John Scully for pricing
Right.
it too high.
We asked John Scully to come on the show or send us a message, and he said, I live in Florida. Wait, no, he said more. Actually, he wrote it all down here. He said, you have some great guys to give you the facts. Unfortunately, I live in Florida, not Silicon Valley. John Scully.
We could have Skyped him.
So I was saying earlier, John was in an interview just this month, and he said very kind things about Steve.
Yeah.
He said he really didn't think it was necessary for Steve to leave, but Steve was really stubborn and headstrong, and wanted to be in charge. And,
The problem is Steve didn't have the patience and the maturity as when he returned. And other people ran companies before, like John Scully did, and they knew what it would take. And the trouble is, Steve wanted to go in ways that they felt would not work.
So around this time, was Apple going to announce a loss because the Mac wasn't selling?
Right.
Right.
At the time they announced Steve was stepping down,
Right.
They announced the loss simultaneously. That was May 31st, 1985.
So the movie shows
And stock went down quite a bit, too.
the movie shows Steve trying to figure out how to sell it for less, and then you walk in the room, and that's when you resign from Apple. It's late at night. You walk in the room, and you say, "It's not fun anymore, so I don't want to be here." And we don't talk anymore. You and I grew apart. Now that's not all how it happened, right?
I left when I had a plane crash.
Yeah.
I came out of amnesia, and I realized that the best people, in my opinion, in the world were on the Macintosh team, and I wasn't critical to it to have a success. And I told Steve that I'm going to go back to school and get my degree. That's not telling him I don't like things. Now, in 1985 or so, I got this idea to start a company to build the first universal remote control. And people who know me know that I always love to see the new technologies, and here I was still young enough to be a part of making one. And got this idea. I got an engineer interested in it with me, so I left to build that project. At the same time, we had a board meeting just before I was going to leave, after I'd made presentations to Apple employees, Apple executives on blackboards showing them what I was going to do, so they wouldn't think like I'm ditching out secretly to have another company on the side. They kept me on the payroll. They kept me an Apple employee under an employment contract, and wished me very well and said I was doing nothing competitive with Apple. But the Wall Street Journal called, and I mentioned that I was a little upset because we just had a shareholders meeting. At the shareholders meeting, the Apple II wasn't mentioned one time. And I called John Scully, and I was screaming that at him. He said it was mentioned one time. The Apple II was all the revenues of the company, for the first 10 years. This is rather something that was being left out deliberately, acting like all we are Macintosh. We had to earn our way there. So and I was speaking up not for myself, my own feelings, because I wouldn't do that. I was speaking up for all the people around me in the Apple II division that just came back from that shareholders meeting so upset and ready to quit and just disgusted with how little respect they were getting. And Steve called them bozos. That's why he put us in a building way away from the main campus.
A triangle building.
Just because he felt we were worthless and
Were you off
nothing.
on Bub Road or somewhere?
No, it was a triangle building.
It was on Lawrence and 280.
Oh, that was way out. Yeah.
And so I was doing it on the behalf of other people. They didn't have a voice like I had. They couldn't call John Scully and get him shaking in his chair, and I could, and I did it for them. And but I was leaving the company for other reasons. Well, the Wall Street Journal said I was leaving Apple because I didn't like what Apple was doing, and that was not the truth. But it's history. It's in all the books that way. So that's what the movie was, sort of had me saying that. I never had a meeting with Steve Jobs. I never went with him and told him I'm leaving, or anything like that, or it's not the same. No.
All right, we've got to pause here for like a minute and a half. When we come back, we're going to talk about the coup and Steve Jobs leaving the company. So don't go away. I was told I shouldn't say don't go away, because that gives people the idea that they could go away. I hadn't thought of going away. Maybe I will.
I want you to stay. Wow. Well, having all this stuff on the page does make it easy to have things to talk about.
Wait a minute. Apple reveals Macintosh in commercials at sales event in Hawaii. No, it was in Cupertino.
Oh yeah,
Hawaii was the Lemmings one. That was later. That was a
It
later
was
year.
the shareholder meeting.
There
right?
was a meeting in Hawaii, but they conflated that with the introduction.
No, but I
It
went to
wasn't
one
a
in
public-
Hawaii, but it was a
There was
year
a
later.
sales meeting in Hawaii.
Yeah, a year later.
No, that was in. It was
If they
where
went to
they were.
the shareholder meeting.
Well, I attended it. They showed the Lemmings commercial before it had been on TV.
Yeah,
Another cherry coke?
No.
they did that every year.
No, I'm fine.
Haven't touched my water if you would ever get thirsty.
Okay, well, there could have been two in
Yeah,
Hawaii.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they had the sales meeting in Hawaii in October every year, and then the introduction in January.
Okay, I didn't go to that one because I guess I was in Cupertino or something.
We have some tweets in, so we'll answer some tweets when we come back. Do we have any messages?
Okay.
San Jose Sharks? No. Okay.
Okay, close to ready?
Mm-hmm.
5. Go.
And we're back! And I'm going to take your tweets now. So earlier I told you if you tweet me, I will answer your questions, or have them answer your questions. Did Steve get fired? No, did Steve getting fired motivate him to learn to be a CEO? So when Steve Jobs got fired.
Who knows the answer?
Steve didn't really get fired.
Right?
No, he didn't.
He had to step down as general manager of the Macintosh division, but they didn't want him fired. He was still chairman of the board.
He could have started any
was not
computer
fired.
project he
Yeah.
wanted
So
and had it
so
funded
he
with
wa-
millions.
So Steve
Yeah.
didn't get fired, but Steve certainly wanted to prove himself when he did.
Was he chairman of the board?
And so the whole purpose of Next really was to prove to the world that he could
Create a
surpass
computer.
Apple, create the best computer ever. And
Gordon Garb states that Bill Atkinson is an accomplished photographer. So that's
Yeah.
what he's doing now.
we should plug his app. He has an app
Yes.
for the iPhone called PhotoCard. That's really fantastic.
I heard PhotoCard is a great application. If you're interested in it, you can get it at the App Store. We have to phrase it very carefully
Yes.
for public access TV.
Okay.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. Public access.
Gordon Garb asks, when did Elmer Baum come on board? I don't know who that is.
Well,
From the beginning.
Alan
Alan
Baum,
Baum's
the
father.
Baums had been friends of mine my whole life, and I introduced Steve very early on to Alan Baum, who was the only person I went to high school with that also was into computers and design and insides of them. And Alan took us down to Hewlett Packard where he worked and showed us early computer games, text-based games like Star Trek and Wampus. And so the Baums were kind of close to us in that sense. Alan declined a very early offer to join Apple, but his father, Elmer Baum, loved his father. His father was one of those guys that had a sense of humor and laughed when the kids did misbehavior. Oh my gosh, I loved that guy so much. He was a big influence on my life. And Elmer came to work for Apple. Just he was beloved by everyone.
He was about
everyone around
20
him as a
years, 20 years older than the next oldest.
He was already
employee.
retired.
Yeah, and he came and he was a technician,
But-
always testing
No, and
equipment.
he also lent you guys $5,000 to build those first PC boards as well, as I recall.
No, this must go back to something else.
No, I heard that too.
Yeah.
I heard.
Because we built the PC parts with our own money.
Well,
Well, it
for the
could be.
next
It could
run
be.
after that or something like
Yeah, it
that.
could be.
Supposedly, Alan told me that his
Yes.
dad lent $5,000.
I heard
and,
that too.
And Steve paid him back the $5,000,
Yeah.
but nothing else. No interest, no stock. No.
So next we have a question. When is the Woz movie coming out? And I
Good
I understand
question.
it's probably the movie that Aaron Sorkin is doing.
It's not
you
a
know-
Woz
I
movie.
think
Yeah,
we're
it's
out
not
of
the
we're out of
Woz
place. No. That's the no. It's a movie about Steve Jobs based on Sony purchased the rights to the official
Walter
biography.
Isaacson, Walter Isaacson.
Yeah.
But did
Yeah.
anyone try to buy your book rights? You would think with all that,
People
someone
have
might
suggested it, but no, not yet.
Yeah.
I'm not out there trying to sell it.
I wouldn't be surprised. I got offers for my book, but they weren't real legitimate.
I will appear in your movie if they make one. Okay, so let's get back to the show.
Well,
we left off.
We were talking about Elmer Baum. So because Elmer was an old radio and an analog guy, and his job was testing and tweaking the power supplies. And he sat right next to me when I started. I was doing the logic boards, and he was doing the power supplies. and super helpful guy.
And we kept him for years and years and years, the longest time of any employee. And he was the oldest Apple employee we said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So when we last left off, you had resigned, and now Jobs is about to get sidelined, and so he's planning a coup when Scully is supposed to go to China, and so he has all these guys at his house who are like planning this coup, and then Mike Markula comes and tells him, at this party that I'm behind you. But then at the board meeting, he turns on him. Well, Steve perceives him as turning on him.
Yeah, and that's the basic outlines of that is true, but they had the wrong people. There was a different set of leadership in the Mac team at the time. I had already left, and but there, so it was like a whole different set of people than they had in the movie. They didn't want to introduce those new characters. And then Markla never told, and at least in real life, he never promised to support Steve and told him otherwise. He told Steve the opposite. He told him he wasn't going to support him when he came to his house.
So the movie shows.
Why did the movie take all these little, privileges and directions, always in the same direction?
It would take 20 years to do a movie that spanned 20 years of Apple, I guess. Okay, so there's a board meeting. Everyone votes for Scully over Jobs. Now, my friend Scott Canaster is here tonight. He's famous for writing all the books that all the engineers read to learn how to write the Macintosh software. Now, he's LinkedIn friends with Del Yoakum, who is on the board. And Scott tells me that Del told the story that at this meeting, he says, "I love you, Steve, but I respect you, John."
Ooh.
So that was an interesting quote, I thought.
Yeah, I never thought Dell was the most competent. It's okay.
Except Dell ran the division that made the money.
Yeah, the Apple II. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true.
Right.
Oh,
So
okay.
competence depends what you want to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so then they had a montage in the movie where, Steve leaves Apple. Then years later, Scully is thrown out of Apple. And then they hire Gil Amelio. And then they show
there was a Mike Spindler.
Yeah.
There's a Spindler in between with the gloss
And
over.
Mark, somewhere, I don't know.
And then they next buys Apple.
Next buys Apple.
Or vice versa.
That's actually a fair description of what happened.
So
It's
internal to Apple, we called it the reverse takeover of Apple by Next.
Right.
Because Apple paid money to Next to buy them,
$400 million.
$427 million, and then all the executives at Apple were taken out and sidelined and replaced with all the Next executives. So like Avi Tevanian was from Next.
He was already there.
Rubinstein.
Well, no, he came with Next, right? He came
Right,
with Next.
and then
And
Rubinstein,
John Rubinstein.
came from Next. So like, and all
A lot of the top ones, but not
Did
all
Rick
through
Page
them.
come back to Apple?
Who?
Did Rick Page come back to Apple
don't
after
know.
Next?
Don't remember.
I don't think he did. He didn't. A lot of the original found Next was doing very
But,
badly.
I
before
talked
that,
to
and
Mike
a lot of the
Markla
founded
about
came
that
left.
when, the day that Gil called me and said we were going to buy Next for $400 million. And then Mike Markla dropped by my office and said, "How do you feel about it?" And I wasn't for it. I said, "We don't need to spend $400 million for an operating system." I told Steve Jobs the same thing, and he agreed. and Mike Markla said, "Yeah, that's true, but we are in bad shape with ideas and products, and we need people. And Next has a lot of great talented engineers and designers, and that's really what we're buying."
People were leaving Apple a lot in those days.
Well, the people that were left weren't considered super innovators. They could crank the machine around and have the new machine every year, like you tend to get into a
and
habit
they
of
had
doing.
a new operating system under development that fell flat. It just failed. It was.
It was
not
kind of too hard a
shippable.
task, and the reason it was too hard a task was
It was
because
called
of
Copeland.
flaws in the original Macintosh operating system that weren't really designed for the world that would have networking.
Yes, yes.
That Steve would talk about how he missed that when he went to Xerox PARC, the importance of networking. So it was really his lack of vision that hurt Macintosh quite a bit at that point in time. So really what we, so we were in kind of dire straits. But we didn't need a new operating system because our operating system was actually okay. and people were saying your Macs are crashing 3 times a day. They're crashing all over the place,
Yes.
every single day. But it wasn't the operating system. It was Internet Explorer. Everyone had switched to Internet Explorer. No, it was. It didn't crash in Internet Explorer. It crashed
Yes,
in the
yes,
Finder.
yes, yes.
It crashed in other programs.
Yes.
And I discovered it by accident. I couldn't get very many people in Apple to listen to me. And the way I discovered it was my son switched to some weird little lightweight browser from Germany called iCab one day. I thought, whatever Jesse does, I want to do. Follow the kids. And so I switched to iCab, and my Mac didn't crash the first day. My Duo didn't crash. By night, I was mind-boggled. It didn't crash the next day. It would go for weeks without crashing. And you know, everybody who said Macs crash all the time on the forums were running servers in those days. They were all running servers, the big heavy Mac users. The servers never crashed. They were running Macintosh. They never ran Internet Explorer.
Wow.
That was the difference. And I went on my forums and I put out this little word, and it turns out the few people that we didn't believe who said they never crashed were using Netscape. I went to 2 of my friends. One is a deaf technician and one was a financial guy, Marty Spurgell. They said they never crashed. Both of them were using Netscape.
Wow.
It was
there you
that
go.
simple a formula, but we're past that because at least the operating system allowed Internet Explorer to do it. I'd love to go back and run some test software, debugging software, and find out if Internet Explorer had something deliberate inside to make Macs crash-worthy.
Wow.
All right, so the movie shows Jobs at home now with Lisa, who is the daughter he denied having for a long time. Now she's staying for some amount of time at his house. And he's there with his wife, Laureen, and his son, Reed. And I think the scene was probably put there to show Steve Jobs is now grown up, and he's not the same guy he was before. And he seems a lot calmer. And so at this point, Gil Amelio is trying to convince Jobs to come to Apple as part of the purchase as an advisor or something, just to help them out. And Steve's hemming and hawing. Now I remember at the Macworld keynote, 1997, they announced the deal, and they brought you on stage too, and they're saying both Steves are coming back to Apple. And that was the last time I saw you at Apple.
I don't think they said such a thing, but yeah, I talked to Steve a bit during that show about different things, yeah.
So did you do anything for Apple past that point?
No, it was never my intent to come back into Apple like an engineer. The way I'd been once before, that was too intense a life, and by now my just being open to the public, the press, and all that, my life didn't have enough time to do that kind of engineering I'd done once.
Did Apple ever call
and I
you
didn't want to just
help?
be a think-up ideas person. What?
Advice? Did Apple ever call you for advice? Not necessarily engineering, but what should we do?
No.
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 Yeah.
I think I think Steve really. I think he liked being in control to prove himself after his earlier times at Apple, and I think he wanted that alone. Bask in the sunlight. But he was always very respectful and very nice to me.
So Steve Jobs comes back to Apple, and they show him in the lobby of Apple, walking around. And now I know they can't use actual locations in the movie, but they chose a horrible place to choose the lobby of Apple. It's like some kind of shopping mall or something it looked like. It wasn't at all like what the Apple lobby looks like. But they did have a helicopter fly over the campus, and you could see the real campus. And you could see the cafeteria being renovated. The day they chose to fly over was like the 3 months they were renovating the cafeteria.
Wow.
But yeah, horrible facsimile for the lobby. And they show him walking around, Apple poking his head in. And Keith Statenfield, who's on the crew tonight, he told me this funny story, is that he'd be like in a meeting, planning out Mac OS 8 things or something, and Steve Jobs was just popping in random meetings. He'd just walk into a meeting and say, "Hey, you guys, what are you all talking about?" Maybe not so Texan. And and so they would
Not texting at all.
not texting at all. And so people would say, "Oh, we're talking about this thing we're thinking about for Mac OS 8." And then Steve would talk for a while, say, "Oh, here's what I think you should do. You should do it this way, and this way." And then he'd leave and everybody would be stunned. And then I guess a few days or weeks later, half the people didn't work there anymore. Is that?
It was that time.
Yeah. So that was interesting. So Steve would walk around and...
Steve was like that in the very early days. If he was scheduled to come to a meeting, he wouldn't show up, but he'd pop into meetings both he was scheduled to and not all the time, and then sometimes only stay for minutes.
My manager at work's like that too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have him meeting Jonathan Ive. Steve, walks around and he bumps into Jonathan Ive, and he asks him, like, "Why are you here? Like, this company is a sinking ship. Why are you still here?" Sort of thing. And he says, and Jonathan Ive says, "Oh, I have hope. I still believe in what you built." Who knows if that's true? Because we don't have Jonathan Ive here. Jobs sells all his shares, and the stock drops 7.5% overnight. So he sells like 1.5 million shares because they think he's losing faith. This is still when Gil Milo's in charge.
Those are the shares he got for the purchase of
Yeah.
Next. And he went through an agonizing period where he talked to a lot of different people, including me, about could Apple be saved? This was before he had come back, so maybe the timing's a little off. But before he decided to take it over, he didn't want to take it over if it was just going to tank, obviously.
Right.
So he had a lot of indecision. So he talked to a lot of people, and then finally made his decision. It was going to fail. He couldn't take it over, and he sold all that stock, even though he had promised not to.
At an all-time
He
low.
sold everything. Yeah.
Pretty
Well,
much.
Twice when Steve twice managed to sell all of his Apple stock except for one share at the all-time low. He hit the all-time low within a few dollars. He did that in
That's when you lose
1985
faith, right?
after he got fired the first time. He sold all of it, and he almost hit the exact low, and then he did it again in 1997.
I remember Avi Tavanian also told us that story at a communications meeting. He said, "Don't count Apple out because it always goes back."
Yeah.
Then it shows Ed Woolard and Mike Markula trying to convince Steve Jobs to become CEO. So they're kind of tired with Gil Milio, and they want Steve to step up. And he's reluctant. Now the movie portrays Steve as kind of agreeing to it. When they throw out Gil, he kind of agrees to take over. A lot of people forget that when Gil left Apple, Fred Anderson, the CFO, became CEO for 2-3 months, maybe more.
Steve felt that of everyone on Gil's staff, Fred Anderson was the only one worth salt.
He was the only one who actually stuck around after Gil, yeah. And then Fred took the fall for Steve in the options episode. Okay, so we see pictures of Ives designing the iMac around this time. So it was in like 1997, which is about right, I guess. 'Cause I think the iMac came out in 98.
That's right, May 1998.
May 98, yeah. So we see Gil, saying to the board, well, Steve Jobs has been really helpful around here, and I think now it's time. We've transitioned. We don't really need him around as an advisor anymore. And I like this part where the board says, yes, we agree he's not an advisor anymore.
Right.
And then, Steve gives all his ideas, like he's taking control. And then they have a quick vote, and they vote for Jobs, and they throw out Gil Milio. But that's not it.
Well, and Steve never really accepted the full CEO of Apple until he had him recovered
for years
in 2000.
Yeah. So he was always adamant.
He called him ICEO.
ICO.
Interim CEO.
Yeah, he was adamant not to be CEO for a while until it was clear Apple had a future going forward. So then the board votes for Jobs, and then he slowly kicks off all the members of the board he didn't like, which is, I think, most of them. I think only 2 survived.
Yeah.
So like Mike Markula, who started.
And he brought in.
No, Markula had to leave.
Yeah, he brought in a bunch of new board members, including Larry Ellison. There's a really funny story about that, which is Larry Ellison agreed to be on Apple's board because he was friends with Steve, but he never came to any of the board meetings until finally Steve had a big life-size picture of Larry Ellison that he put in the seat for the meeting.
Cardboard cutout.
That's funny.
And there was a plan at one point for Steve and Larry to buy Apple.
Yes.
Do like a.
That was before Steve came back.
Okay.
He told that story. Larry Ellison told that story at Steve's memorial service about him. He had a really funny story about he was trying to convince Steve to let him fund buying Apple so Steve could run it, and Steve didn't want to. He said he didn't want to do it until Apple asked him to come back because. He wants to be on the higher moral ground. And Larry Ellison said, that higher moral ground, that's expensive real estate.
And the movie ends with Jobs recording the Think Different ad. So he's doing a voiceover and he does, here's to the crazy ones, square pegs, square holes, round pegs, etc. We're crazy. We make stuff happen. Anyways, you guys all know the commercial. Now, in the commercial we saw on TV, it was Richard Dreyfuss doing the voiceover. But Steve Jobs had recorded it originally. And near the time of his death, it popped up. And I think it was on YouTube. And we could all hear Steve Jobs say that speech, and it sounded really powerful.
Steve cared so much about that commercial.
And you could hear it in the voice. Like, you'd think he could have used his voice in that commercial without Richard Dreyfuss, and it'd be, amazing. But hearing it later at his memorial at Apple, it really brought tears to everybody's eyes, because they played it then too, and it was quite incredible. Okay, so we're going to take a final break, and then we'll read your questions.
Okay. We don't have long for the break
Why is that?
because it's 9:19 and we got to switch tapes and people got to leave. It's
Yeah.
not Mac Heck, for God's sakes.
Mac Hack.
Started too early. Well, except in Michigan, it would have been closer.
Let's see if any more tweets. People are following me. Let's see if you get or motivate him.
Make,
A lot of good
you
stories.
got to find some really good
Can we make up something good?
questions.
Someone make up a
Don't
question.
Don't make up.
Anybody here got a question?
Pirates? Compared to pirates?
Can-
Pirates. Pirates of Silicon Valley.
Okay, save that. We'll ask that later.
Different movie.
All right.
Yes, I know that.
I'm going to check the messages from the website.
iOS 7 and what was Steve about?
Okay, are you ready in there?
John, be rude. Ask him about Google.
Ask what about Google?
Nobody cares about Google. Okay, ready in the booth? Ready in the set? John, ready?
Yes, I am as ready as I'm going to be, I think.
5, 4.
And we are back. And we went through the whole movie, and it was mostly wrong. We had a question from the audience. That guy. He asked, how would you compare this movie to the Pirates of Silicon Valley movie, the one with Noah Wyle on TNT a few years back?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
I got to where I don't want to read Apple books and watch Apple movies, and I had an advanced copy of Pirates of Silicon Valley. I think came from Andy.
And I got mine from Dad.
And my wife wanted to see it at the time, so I put it on the VCR, and it caught my attention from the first scene. And then there I was with a blue box in the tear gas from the cops at
Right.
Berkeley, and I said, "My God, that's how it was." I just perked up, and that was an interesting, from the start to the end. You were trying to follow stories, and where does it go next? And it was suspenseful, and I like suspense. And I didn't get that way on this movie. It's just like, okay, I'm seeing more of a story, sort of, that is parts that are known, parts that are very wrong. Now, you can't go back and take a scene that occurred in the past and sit a bunch of people you don't know and they've never been in the press and get their personalities right, get the words they would say right, get the relations right. But each scene in Silicon Valley sort of was a theme of the correct meaning of what a progression of our industry as it developed, and it was an interesting story. People want to see that American dream. How did these companies, Microsoft, Apple, where did they come from? They want to hear that story more than I think they want to see what was Steve Jobs like in his mannerisms and all that. So I basically was kind of bored and didn't get, emotionally, really into it like Pirates of Silicon Valley.
Pirates was like a more dramatization of two companies, Microsoft and Apple, at the dawn of the computer age coming together. Whereas this movie was just, one guy.
But it had kind of conflicts and little resolutions and what's next and steps.
I love
steps
Pirates
along
of
the way.
Silicon Valley, and I love the ending of it. Was the best part, I thought, by far, where Steve Jobs and Bill Gates had copied the Macintosh with Windows, and Steve says to him, finally goes, "Well, ours is better. We're still better." And Bill Gates looks at him and goes, "You don't get it, Steve. That doesn't matter."
Although Steve learned a lot about keeping things secret from Microsoft and others.
In both movies, Steve Jobs yelled at Bill Gates for stealing the Macintosh.
Right.
And at the end of the movie, too, I think they ended it with the Macworld 98, I guess, where they made the deal with Microsoft, and you had Bill Gates on the huge screen behind him, and everyone saw that and thought, hey, that looks a lot like the guy in the 1984 ad.
Yeah.
So the enemy wasn't IBM after all. So that's all I got.
Well, my comment is, okay, so Noah Wiley, awesome job as Steve Jobs, right? Michael Anthony Hall playing you was...
No.
He
played Bill Gates.
Joey
Slotkin.
Slotkin.
No, Michael Anthony Hall
Played Bill Gates.
Oh, I
Joey
remember that.
Slotkin
Oh, I
played-
see, I see. Well, okay, but he didn't capture your brilliance and your humor, right? That was my biggest complaint. And that's my complaint about the Jobs film also, is that Josh Gad, although...
He read my book 3 times, he told me. He
Yes.
wanted to put in, he told me different scenes he wanted to put in, but they didn't let him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I liked him when I met him in person.
Oh, yeah.
I want
But,
to meet him.
Yeah. Anyway, he did not, that was Bill Atkinson's big complaint, is that he didn't capture your sense of humor and playfulness.
But the answer is it's a movie about jobs. That's fine.
That's right. That's right. So we look forward to a movie about you.
That's fine. But when you portray me as being Beatles,
And the difference between those two movies, they both had good performances. Like Ashton Kutcher did a good job with Steve's mannerisms and stuff. Noah Wiley did a great job, but the difference is it was in the screenplay, the script. I don't even know the guy who did Pirates of Silicon Valley, but that was a good script. It actually had good conflict. It had the deeper meaning was true for things. Whereas the Jobs movie, the guy who here's something Dan told me that kind of explains it, which is the screenwriter was a first-time screenwriter, never written a screenplay before. Well, how did he get the job to write that movie? His dad put up all the money for the movie. His dad was the producer, and
I wanted to see Steve trading off thinking with other people, trying to come to conclusions of what we should do and why. I wanted to see that kind of brilliance. And
the guy didn't really. I
best
met him because
it's off
Rod
the
Holt
knife, I
had
guess.
that screening,
Yeah.
and the screenwriter was there,
Yes.
and he talked about
Matt Whiteley.
things, but he just had a superficial understanding, but in particular, he didn't know how to write a screenplay. Really, it was just a laundry list of incidents as opposed to things that would show a deeper meaning. That's why the movie was so flawed.
It did
But
get
even
better.
the incident with Johnny Ives was kind of like seemed so made up and artificial and
Yeah.
phony, and
Yeah.
you want the real. You want more realism.
I think it's worth just, in making that film, it was a huge choice of where to start it and where to end it and what to leave out. And they completely left out Pixar. They completely left out Next. And some of the reviewers criticized it for the chosen arc of the story. I don't have an opinion
for the
myself.
time frame of the story, which is mostly up until Steve left.
Right.
He was a different person than the one they portrayed was the later Steve Jobs more. The leader and conveyor of knowledge to everyone. He was very much, also learning from everyone in the earlier times and, hoping to be there. But he wasn't the able to produce the big winning products that we love so much until later.
Right, so they portrayed him as being the God we know him today all along, but really not until later. At least he liked that.
Well, and so here's my last comment is, it's just, I know because I was working with the filmmakers, they really did try very hard to get the history right. And I wrote them many, many comments of stuff that was obviously wrong. There were a lot of things I didn't know, but it's just impossible, really. It's an impossible task. What I thought was that the movie did a pretty good job of getting the emotional notes right. That's what I say, anyway. It got the highs and the lows. Although your comment about it not showing Steve's thought process in being charismatic and hiring people, right?
I wanted to see the way he really thought and the words that he would have used to make a trade-off in a product feature or something, a back and forthness. I would have wanted that.
That is hard to do.
But I didn't get the emotions of, oh my gosh, I love him, I hate him. It was kind of like neutral throughout.
Yes.
You know, I laughed 3 times. You know, the Polish jokes and the real funny one when he said Woz is carrying his own weight. I laughed. I wasn't heavy back then, but
all right,
it was funny.
We're out of time, so I got to thank you guys so much for being on the show. This was a great show. Thanks for coming out the way and telling all your stories. And we finally, got some real perspective on how things went. So thanks, Andy and Daniel and Steve. And
Thank you, John.
Thanks for watching. And we're going to roll credits. And while we roll credits, we're going to do a high five and then freeze frame. That's how we end the show.
Trademark.
Are you ready?
We all do our own high five?
All at once?
Okay. Oh, Isaac, you're supposed to hold our hands like, or we're waving.
The credits are going to go for a while.
I don't see the credits moving.
Wait, there should be more credits. I think we're stuck. Uh-oh. Should be the credit. Where's... You guys got it? Yeah, there we go.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
What do I got, guys? More credits. You need to speed up the credits. Credits should be faster.
So the show could not have been live. Because he only has a half-hour slot. That's why I was so surprised.
No, I'm gonna...
So YouTube could have it all.
Eventually.
We need some promotional photos after this, so don't go away.